Madeline Cross, 30 years old, CEO of a billion-dollar company, the youngest woman to ever sit at the head of Vantage Global, and the one they never stopped whispering about, not because of what she built, because of how she looked building it. Tonight was supposed to be her night. A gala, speeches, champagne. Instead, she stood outside in the cold, mascara ruined, listening to men in expensive suits make jokes they thought she couldn't hear. She had survived boardrooms, hostile takeovers, and public humiliation, but cruelty from people who smiled at her face, that was something else entirely. Like this video. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The Hartwell Grand had been booked for months. 700 guests, 4-course dinner, a jazz quartet that cost more per hour than most people made in a week. The event planner, a tightly wound woman named Cressida who communicated exclusively through color-coded spreadsheets, had promised Madeline that the evening would be, in her exact words, flawless and unforgettable. She was half right. Madeline Cross stood in front of the floor-length mirror in Suite 1402 and tried to recognize herself. The navy gown was custom, structured at the shoulders, cut to move well. Her stylist, a calm woman named Petra, who never offered opinions that weren't asked for, had spent 90 minutes on her hair and another 45 on her face. The result was polished, professional, expensive. It was also, Madeline thought, the visual equivalent of armor. She turned sideways, then turned back. She'd been doing this, the mirror routine, since she was 16, this involuntary audit of everything that was too much or not enough. Stomach, hips, arms, the way the fabric pulled slightly at the waist. Her brain cataloged the flaws with the efficiency of a machine that had been running the same program for 14 years and saw no reason to stop. "You look beautiful," Petra said from the corner, folding a lint roller into her kit. "You say that to everyone." "I work with 3 clients, and I mean it every time." Madeline picked up her clutch. "Let's just get through tonight." Baza. Downstairs, the gala was already in full swing when she arrived. The Hartwell Grand's main ballroom had been transformed. Draped in ivory and gold, chandeliers blazing, the kind of engineered elegance that cost a fortune to make look effortless. Madeline walked in at 7:42, and the room did what rooms always did when she entered. It paused. Not out of admiration. Out of something more complicated than that. Something she'd learned to read the way a sailor reads weather. The slight stiffening of postures. The micro-adjustments of expression. The eyes that assessed and then looked away just a half-second too deliberately. She smiled. She always smiled. You could not run a company worth $800 million without learning to smile through things that wanted to break you. Madeline. Douglas Fenn appeared at her side, extending a hand. He was Vantage's longest-serving board member, 63 years old, silver-haired, with a handshake that had been engineered over decades to communicate both warmth and hierarchy at the same time. "You look wonderful. Happy birthday." "Thank you, Douglas." "Great quarter," he added. The margins on the Pacific Division report were impressive. "The team worked hard." He nodded, already looking past her towards someone more interesting. "Enjoy the evening." She collected a glass of sparkling water and navigated the room. There were introductions, other executives, investors, partners, people whose names she memorized and whose faces she matched to profiles she'd read at 6 in the morning before meetings. She was good at this part. The management of rooms, the projection of competence. She had practiced it so thoroughly that most people never looked past the performance to the exhaustion underneath. At 8:15, she excused herself from a conversation about supply chain bottlenecks and slipped toward the quieter edge of the room, near the corridor that led to the secondary bar. She needed 2 minutes. Just 2 minutes of not performing. She didn't get them. The voices came from the alcove around the corner. 3 men, from the sound of it, keeping their volume just low enough to indicate they knew this wasn't a conversation for public consumption. "She always wears that color. Does she think it's slimming?" Laughter. Low, comfortable, the kind of laughter that came from men who were used to taking up space. The profile in the Meridian Review said she runs 8 miles a week. I genuinely do not believe that. More laughter. I just think, and I say this professionally, that she's a liability. The optics alone. We're supposed to be presenting a certain image in the international markets, and instead we've got a very capable CEO, said a third voice, drier than the others, in a tone that didn't actually push back so much as create the appearance of pushing back. Capable, sure. But you know what the first thing is that comes up when you search her name? It's not the Pacific Division. It's not the quarterly numbers. It's that piece the gossip site ran about her and the nutritionist. Madeline stood very still. She recognized one of the voices. She was almost certain she did. Martin Greaves, who sat 2 seats to her left at every board meeting, who had voted in favor of her last 2 major acquisitions, who had sent her a handwritten note when Vantage hit its 3rd consecutive record quarter. She would not be certain. She would not let herself be certain. Because certain meant she had to do something with it, and right now she didn't have the capacity. She walked back into the ballroom. She accepted a compliment about her gown from someone whose name she immediately forgot. She ate 4 bites of the first course and moved the rest around the plate with the practiced skill of someone who'd spent years in the company of people who watched what she put in her mouth. She gave the birthday toast that Cressida's team had helped her draft. Warm, self-deprecating at the right moments, forward-looking, appropriately humble. People applauded. By 10:30, she was done. She told her assistant she had an early call. She slipped out through the side entrance, the one that opened to the covered drive where cars idled. The air outside was cool and smelled like rain that hadn't arrived yet. She didn't call the car service right away. She just stood there for a moment on the pavement, in her $700 shoes, holding a clutch that contained her phone and a tube of lipstick she hadn't needed to reapply because she'd eaten almost nothing. The ballroom sounds bled through the walls. Muffled music, muffled laughter, the low thrum of a party continuing perfectly well without her, the optics alone. She started walking. She wasn't dressed for it, and she didn't care. The streets near the Hartwell Grand were the kind that had been meticulously zoned for this. Upscale restaurants, wine bars with frosted glass fronts, boutiques that had been closed since 6 but left their lights on for atmosphere. Her heels clicked on the pavement in a way that felt too loud. Everything felt too loud and also, somehow, too silent. She walked 4 blocks before her feet protested seriously enough to make her slow down. The restaurant appeared almost by accident. Nora's Kitchen, the sign said, hand-lettered in that style that was either genuinely old or deliberately imitating old. Warm yellow light through the windows. Not the calculated warmth of a design dining experience. Just actual warm light from what looked like pendant lamps that were hung by someone who cared more about function than aesthetic. She stood outside for a moment. Through the glass, she could see the inside. Maybe 12 tables, half of them occupied at this hour. A chalkboard menu. A counter with glass cases that probably held pie. She was not dressed for this restaurant. She was dressed for the restaurant she'd just left. But she was also standing alone on a sidewalk at 10:45 at night on her birthday, and the alternative was going back to the hotel suite where Petra had left everything neat and quiet and utterly empty. She pushed the door open. Kocha. The woman at the host station was maybe 19, with the slightly distracted energy of someone dividing attention between incoming guests and a group chat on her phone. She looked at Madeline, actually looked at her, just for a fraction of a second, in that way people did, the involuntary assessment, and then said, "Just you tonight? Just me? Corner booth okay? It's quieter. Perfect." The booth was in the back left corner, partially behind a wooden partition that had a trailing plant on top of it. Madeline slid in, set her clutch on the table, and looked at the laminated menu with the focus of someone who needed something concrete to fix their eyes on. She wasn't hungry. She ordered water and a cup of coffee she probably didn't need and the soup of the day, which was potato leek, because she had to order something and that seemed like the least consequential choice. She didn't cry until she was 3 sips into the coffee. Not dramatically. She wasn't a dramatic crier. She'd cried twice at work in 14 years, and both times in bathroom stalls where she'd run the tap to cover the sound. It was more like pressure releasing, eyes filling up before she could stop them. She pressed the back of her wrist to her face and looked at the ceiling and breathed through it, willing herself to stop. The optics alone. She thought about calling someone. She scrolled through her phone as if she might find a person she could call at 10:45 on a Thursday to say, "I just listened to men mock my body at my own birthday party. and I'm sitting in a diner trying not to fall apart. And she found, going through the list, that she didn't have that person. She had contacts. She had colleagues. She had 3 people she'd call in a professional emergency. She didn't have the person you called in a human one. She put the phone face down on the table. Wyatt Turner was trying to figure out how to explain to his 8-year-old daughter why dinner had become significantly more awkward than anticipated without telling the truth, which was that his blind date had looked at him, looked at Ava, and decided that the whole situation was too much to navigate on a Thursday. She left, Ava said. She was matter-of-fact about this, the way she was matter-of-fact about most things. Her mother's same expression, that level, clear-eyed appraisal that saw situations exactly as they were without the noise of wishful thinking layered over them. It was, depending on the moment, either Ava's best quality or her most exhausting one. She had an emergency, Wyatt said. What kind? Work thing. She left her purse. Wyatt looked at the hook on the wall beside the booth. Dana had, in fact, left her small crossbody bag in her haste to extract herself from the situation. It was burgundy. He would have to call the restaurant tomorrow to arrange returning it, which meant calling Dana, which was a call he was not looking forward to. I'll take care of it, he said. Ava looked at him with the expression he privately thought of as the X-ray look, the one that went through whatever story he was trying to tell and examined the machinery underneath. Did she leave because of me? No, absolutely not. Because last time, that was different, and no. Ava, she had a work thing. He held her gaze until she seemed to partially accept this. You okay? I'm fine. She picked up a fry. Are you sad? He considered this with more honesty than he usually allowed himself. Was he sad? He was tired. He'd gotten a babysitter for last Tuesday, and that date had also gone nowhere. And before that, there had been a coffee meeting with a woman from the app who'd spent most of the conversation talking about her ex-husband. Blind dates were the territory of a specific kind of optimism that Wyatt was running low on, and Dana had been set up by his coworker Marcus, who was well-meaning but had the taste of someone who had never met Wyatt. Not really, he said, which was mostly true. Good. Ava dipped the fry. She had weird shoes anyway. He laughed, which surprised him. Ava! They were really tall, like she couldn't walk right. I'm not being mean. I'm observing. He had been told by 2 different teachers and 1 pediatrician that Ava had a gift for language and a temperament that was somewhere between precocious and difficult, depending on how you came at it. Her first-grade teacher had written highly verbal and deeply literal on an assessment, which Wyatt had read 3 times because it described his daughter exactly, and also because it made him quietly proud in the way that was hard to explain. He'd been alone with her for 6 years. Since Sophie died, not suddenly, not all at once, but in that slow, terrible way that cancer took people, giving you time to prepare and then taking it all away anyway. He'd been Ava's only person, and she had been his. He'd gone back to work when she was 18 months old. He'd learned to braid her hair from YouTube videos at 11 at night. He'd navigated parent-teacher conferences and stomach bugs and the particular grief of a 5-year-old asking why her friends had mommies, and she didn't, and he'd done it without a script and mostly without falling apart, which was the only goal he'd set himself. He drove a delivery truck for a logistics company. He made decent money. Not gala money, not the kind of money that paid for birthday parties in hotel ballrooms, but enough. Their apartment was clean and warm and had a backyard that technically belonged to the whole building but that no one else ever used, which meant it functionally belonged to Ava. He wasn't bitter about what he didn't have. He'd made his peace with the math of his life. But sometimes, sitting in restaurants after dates left, watching his daughter eat fries with that composed, untroubled face, sometimes the loneliness landed. Dad? Ava's voice shifted. The observing tone replaced by something quieter. She was looking past him, toward the corner of the restaurant. That lady is crying. He turned, keeping it casual. The corner booth, behind the partition. A woman in what was clearly a very expensive dress, coffee in front of her, looking at nothing. Her eyes were wet. She wasn't making noise about it. If anything, she was visibly trying to stop. But in the relatively empty restaurant, it was hard to miss. Don't stare, he said. I wasn't staring, I was looking. Ava set down her fry. She's alone. Lots of people eat alone. On their birthday? He frowned. What? There's a little happy birthday thing on her table. A card or something. Ava craned her neck just slightly. And she's crying. He looked again. A small folded card, Bussy hotel stationery by the look of it, propped against the salt shaker. He hadn't noticed it. Still, he said, it's not our business. But she's sad. Ava, Dad. She gave him the look, the one that was exactly like Sophie's. She's sad, and she's alone, and it's her birthday. How is that not our business? He sat with this for a moment. He'd raised a kid who thought like this, who saw other people's pain as adjacent to her own in some fundamental way. And he was proud of it, and occasionally it made his life significantly more complicated. What do you want to do? He asked, as if he didn't already know. We should ask her to sit with us. We don't know her. That's fine. She can just sit here. She's probably... Dad, it's her birthday. He exhaled. Then he pushed back his chair. Madeline had gotten the crying mostly under control and was working on being unremarkable when she became aware of a small person standing at the side of her booth. 8, maybe 9 years old, dark braids with small pink hair ties at the ends, a t-shirt that said something cool in block letters, jeans with a grass stain on one knee, looking at her with the completely unfiltered directness that only small children managed. Not rude, exactly, just unmediated. Like the expression on her face hadn't gone through the filter that most adults installed by the time they were 12. Hi, the girl said. Hi. Madeline's voice came out slightly more wrecked than she'd intended. I'm Ava. Madeline. We noticed you were sitting alone. Ava said this with the simplicity of a person who did not consider noticing things to be an invasion of privacy. My dad and I have extra room, if you want to sit with us. Behind her, the father appeared. 30-something, slightly rumpled, the kind of face that looked like it had spent a lot of time outdoors, but not necessarily because it wanted to. He was wearing a plaid button-down that he'd probably put on because it was the nicest thing he owned that didn't require a tie. And he had the expression of a man who was deeply aware that this was an unusual thing to do, but had been persuaded by someone with better arguments. You don't have to, he said immediately. Ava wanted to. We saw the birthday card, and look, I'm sorry, this was probably... It's fine, Madeline said. We don't want to bother you. You're not. She looked at Ava, then at him. Something about the whole situation, the rumpled shirt, the girl with the grass-stained jeans, the absolute absence of any kind of calculation in either of their faces, broke through something she hadn't known she was holding rigid. Yes. Okay, I'll come sit with you. Ava looked satisfied in the way that children look satisfied when the world confirmed their hypothesis. His name was Wyatt Turner, and he worked in logistics, and he was a single dad, and his blind date had left, and he told her the last part with the self-deprecating frankness of someone who had decided that embarrassment was a less expensive currency than performance. She left her purse, Ava offered. Ava. It's true. It's a burgundy purse. She looked at Madeline. She didn't like that I came, or maybe she did and the emergency was real, but I don't think so. You don't have to apologize, Madeline said to Wyatt. I got abandoned at a party tonight, too. Different circumstances, but same result. Birthday party? She laughed, and the laugh surprised her, genuinely surprised her, coming out louder than she intended. Company gala. For my birthday. That I organized. He raised his eyebrows. You organized your own birthday party? That's, when you put it like that, is that a CEO thing? She paused. How did you dress? He said it simply. And the way you walked in. Not, I don't mean that weird. I just drive a truck for a living. You pick up on how people carry themselves. She looked at him. He said it without flattery and without intimidation, just as a plain observation, the way someone would describe weather. She couldn't remember the last time someone had said something true about her without it being a setup for something. It's a CEO thing, she said. Slightly. Did they have bad food at the gala? The food was exceptional, and I ate almost none of it. He slid the basket of fries toward her. She looked at it. Something small and complicated moved through her expression. It's just food, Ava said helpfully. We're not watching. Madeline Cross, youngest female CEO in the country, billionaire, woman who had sat across from senators and managed to not blink, took a fry from the basket. It was, in a way that she could not have explained and would not have tried to, one of the better things she'd eaten in years. The evening stretched out past midnight, which none of them had planned. Ava was the fulcrum of the conversation in the way that children often were, directing it with the unerring instinct of someone who had not yet learned which topics were off limits. She wanted to know what a CEO did. She wanted to know if Madeline had ever fired anyone. She wanted to know if Wyatt's company would ever deliver to Madeline's company, and if so, whether that was how rich people and regular people could be friends. Ava, Wyatt started. It's a question, Ava said. It is, Madeline agreed. Rich people and regular people, I don't think geography has much to do with it. What does? She considered the question seriously, which Ava seemed to appreciate, that quality in adults of giving children's questions the weight they deserved. Honesty, mostly. Whether someone tells you the truth. Ava nodded like this was being filed away. Wyatt, for his part, didn't ask about the company or the money or the headlines. He asked at one point if she liked what she did, and the question came out without ceremony, not as a challenge, not as a lead-in to some observation about the cost of ambition, just as a genuine inquiry. Most of the time, she said. Not tonight. Tonight was a bad night. Tonight was a bad night. He nodded. Ava has those. Bad days where everything that's wrong feels more wrong than it actually is. We have a rule in our house. What rule? Soup. She blinked. Sorry? Bad day. You get soup for dinner, no matter what we were planning. Doesn't fix anything, but warm food. Low-stakes meal. Buys you enough breathing room to get to the next day. She looked at the bowl of potato leek in front of her that she'd barely touched when she first sat down. She looked at the fries she'd eaten, absently, in the way you eat things when you've stopped auditing yourself. That's a good rule, she said quietly. He shrugged. It's a dad rule, probably not applicable to your... No, she said. It's a good rule. Ava had fallen asleep by 11:30, folded sideways in the booth with her head on her jacket, her braids across her face, breathing slow and even with the total commitment to rest that children had. Wyatt had watched her go under with the relaxed vigilance of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Sorry, he said. We were supposed to be home by 10. Don't apologize. She's going to have opinions about staying up late tomorrow. What kind of opinions? He looked at Ava with an expression she couldn't quite read. She'll claim it was worth it, then act tired all day and act confused about why. She's sharp, Madeline said. She's a lot. He said it with love, the kind of offhand tenderness that people had when they meant it too much to dress it up. She's everything, actually. But, yeah, a lot. The restaurant was nearly empty. The young woman at the host station was restacking menus with the bored efficiency of someone counting down to close. A busboy moved chairs softly in the back. The jazz that had been playing low in the overhead speakers had given way to something quieter. Acoustic guitar, spare and unhurried. Madeline sat in the yellow light and felt, for the first time in several hours, like she was taking up the right amount of space. Not too much. Not too little. Just present. In her body. In this wooden booth with its laminated menu and its basket of slightly cold fries and its half-empty coffee cups. Can I ask something? Wyatt said. Sure. The gala. You said something happened. She held her cup. I overheard some colleagues talking about me. Saying what? She was quiet. She hadn't planned to tell him. She didn't know him. She had no particular reason to trust a man she'd met in a diner at 11 at night, whose daughter had conscripted her into a birthday dinner. But the evening had this quality, this particular, unrepeatable quality, of having already broken through something, and lying inside it felt like the wrong move. About my appearance, she said. He didn't say anything immediately, which she appreciated. He didn't rush in with an empty reassurance or deflection. He just sat with it for a second the way you sat with information that mattered. These are people you work with. One of them I've known for 4 years. And they said this at your birthday party. Yes. He exhaled through his nose. Something changed in his expression. Not anger, exactly, but a kind of settling, a jaw setting. I'm sorry, he said, and then, that's a garbage thing for someone to do. She laughed a little, unexpectedly. Yeah. I'm not going to tell you to shake it off or whatever. That's not helpful. I'm sorry that happened. Thank you. She paused. You're the first person who said that to me tonight. He looked at her. Shouldn't be. No, she agreed. It shouldn't. She called her driver at 1:45. He materialized outside within 4 minutes. A black SUV, the usual. And she stood in the doorway of Nora's kitchen while Wyatt maneuvered a deeply unconscious Ava into a standing position. She walks in her sleep, he explained, guiding Ava by the shoulders. Does she know where she's going? Not even a little. Ava shuffled toward the door with her eyes 3/4 closed, and as she passed Madeline, she stopped, inexplicably, randomly, in the way that children did things, and said without fully waking, Happy birthday. Then she kept shuffling. Madeline stood very still. Outside on the pavement, Wyatt buckled Ava into the back seat of his own car. Older, practical, a child's jacket on the back seat, and what looked like a library book in the footwell, and then stood up and looked at Madeline across the parking lot. Drive safe, she said. It was inadequate. You too. He tilted his head slightly. You going to be okay? She thought about Suite 1402, the quiet, the neatly folded linens, the complimentary birthday card that the hotel had slipped under her door that morning, signed only from the Hartwell Grand team. She thought about tomorrow's calendar, 8 a.m. investment call, 10 o'clock internal review, lunch that she'd eat alone at her desk. Yeah, she said. I think I might be. He nodded. He got in his car. He drove away. She stood on the pavement in her navy gown and her $700 shoes until the taillights disappeared around the corner. Her driver was watching her with the trained neutrality of someone paid to see everything and comment on nothing. She turned and walked to the SUV. Inside, warm and quiet, she looked at her phone. 16 missed messages. 4 from her assistant, 3 from the PR firm, 2 from Douglas Fenn, which was unusual. Douglas almost never texted. 1 from a number she didn't immediately recognize, which turned out to be the event planner Cressida, checking that she'd arrived home safely. None from Martin Greaves. She put the phone in her clutch. She looked out the window at the passing city, lit storefronts, empty sidewalks, the particular quality of urban nighttime that was neither peaceful nor chaotic, but something in between. Somewhere across this city, a little girl with pink hair ties was being carried or shuffled or guided to bed by a man in a plaid shirt who had, for no reason other than that his daughter asked him to, offered an empty seat to a stranger in a corner booth. She hadn't left them her name. She hadn't offered her card. She hadn't done any of the things she automatically did in professional encounters, the machinery of networking that kicked in before she was even conscious of it. She had just sat there and eaten fries and talked to an 8-year-old about whether honesty was the key to friendship, and let a man she'd known for 2 hours say I'm sorry and accepted it at face value. It was the strangest birthday she could remember. It was, she realized, as the SUV pulled up to the Hartwell Grand and the doorman moved to open her door. It was the only part of tonight she wasn't going to forget. She went upstairs. She took off the gown. She ordered room service at 1:15 in the morning. The soup of the day, whatever it was. It came up as cream of tomato. She sat on the bed in her hotel robe and ate it while the city burned quietly outside the window, and something that had been knotted up in her chest all evening came loose by degrees. She slept better than she had in months. She didn't know why. She wasn't going to examine it. But when she woke up the next morning and looked in the mirror and did the things she always did, the inventory, the audit, the familiar accounting of everything that was wrong, she paused. She stood there for a long moment, and then she got dressed without finishing it. She didn't expect to see them again. That was the honest truth of it. Madeline had walked away from Nora's kitchen with no plan, no phone number exchanged, No polite fiction of "we should do this again" that both parties understood meant nothing. It had been one night. A strange, accidental, strangely good night, and she had filed it in the category of things that happened once and were better for staying that way. She had a company to run. She had an 8 a.m. call that Thursday, and a 10 o'clock internal review that ran long because it always ran long, and a lunch she ate at her desk while reviewing contract language for an acquisition that had been in negotiation for 11 weeks. She had a life that was overscheduled by design, because the alternative, the white space, the unstructured hours, was where the other things lived. So she did not expect to see Wyatt Turner again. She saw him 6 days later in the parking garage of the Meridian Tower, where Vantage Global occupied floors 14 through 22. He was in a delivery uniform, dark navy with the Hartwell Logistics logo on the chest, scanning a barcode on a handcart stacked with equipment boxes. He hadn't seen her yet. She almost kept walking. Almost because the rational move was to keep walking, to preserve the thing as it was, the one good memory from a bad night, uncomplicated by the awkwardness of what came after. Instead, she stopped. "Wyatt!" He looked up. It took a half second, the recognition catching up to context. Her, here, in this building, not in a corner booth at 11 at night in a party dress. Then his face did the thing it had done in the restaurant. No performance, no calculation, just a plain response to a real thing. "Huh," he said. "Yeah." He looked at the building, looked back at her. 14 floors? 14 through 22. I've delivered here probably 50 times. I've worked here 6 years. They looked at each other in the specific mild absurdity of the moment. He laughed first, not a polished laugh, more like the sound a person made when they'd been surprised into it. "How's Ava?" she asked. Tired all day Friday, acted confused about why. He said it exactly as he'd predicted it. "Did she remember the birthday?" "She remembered you, kept asking if we were going to see you again." He paused, adjusting the handcart slightly. "I told her probably not. People from fancy parties don't usually end up at Nora's kitchen twice." "I wasn't at a fancy party. I was at a fancy party, and then I left." "Fair point." There was a beat. She thought about the 8 things she had on her calendar before noon. She thought about Ava asking if they were going to see her again. "I have 45 minutes today at 12:30, she said. "If Ava's not in school Friday afternoons?" He tilted his head. Are you sure?" "No," she said, which was the most honest answer. "But I'm asking anyway." He considered her for a moment with the same qualities she'd noticed in the restaurant, that unhurried attention that didn't press but didn't look away either. "She gets out at 2:30. Saturday, then. If you're not, Saturday works." He said it before she finished, and she had the impression he hadn't planned to say it that quickly, and he seemed faintly aware of this. "There's a park near our building. Ava likes it. Nothing fancy." "Good," Madeline said. "I don't need fancy." She went upstairs. She had 7 minutes before the 8 o'clock call. She sat at her desk, opened her laptop, and found that the thing lodged in her chest. That low-grade pressure she'd carried so long she'd stopped noticing its weight was, for the moment, slightly lighter. She noticed it. Then she opened the call. The park was not fancy. It had a swing set with one swing that made a metallic complaint on every forward arc, a sandbox that had seen better decades, and a climbing structure that the city had repainted recently in colors that were technically cheerful. The grass was patchy in the way that parks in dense neighborhoods were patchy, loved too hard in some places and neglected in others. Ava went straight for the swings without preamble. Madeline stood at the edge of the park with her hands in the pockets of her jeans. Actual jeans, not the tailored kind she wore to events, just regular jeans and a jacket and shoes that she could actually walk in. She had spent 20 minutes that morning getting dressed and another 5 standing in front of the mirror before catching herself and leaving the room. "She'll do that for a while," Wyatt said, appearing beside her with 2 coffees he'd gone to get from the cart at the corner. He handed her one. "Fair warning." "I don't mind." "You want to sit?" There were benches along the path. They sat. He stretched his legs out in front of him and held his coffee with both hands and looked at Ava with the specific quality of attention that parents had for their children in motion. Not worry exactly, just the constant low frequency of awareness. "Does she know who I am?" Madeline asked. "I mean, Vantage, any of that?" "She knows you're a CEO. She mentioned it 3 times this week, each time with increasing authority." He paused. "She's been telling her class her friend is a CEO." Madeline looked at him. "Her friend?" "Yeah." He glanced sideways at her. "I didn't correct it." She looked back at the swings. Ava had hit her rhythm now, pumping her legs with the focused ambition of a child trying to reach a specific height. Her braids flew back on each upswing. "She's amazing," Madeline said. "She's a lot," Wyatt said again. Then softer, "Yeah, she's amazing." They sat with that for a minute, in the way that people sat with things that were true and didn't need elaboration. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "And you can tell me to mind my own business." "You can ask." "The gala, the colleagues, whatever they said, has that been happening a long time?" She watched Ava. "Most of my career." "And before that?" She exhaled. "Before that too. School, college, the whole... Yes, it's been a long time." "But you kept going." "I don't know if that's resilience or stubbornness. Is there a difference?" She thought about it. "I used to think so. Now I'm not sure." He nodded slowly. "Ava has a girl in her class, started last year, and the kids are awful, you know? They're just casually awful in the way they don't even know is awful yet. And Ava came home and said something I've been thinking about since." He paused. She said, "She keeps coming back every day. That means she's winning." Like it was the simplest math. Madeline was quiet. 8 years old, he said. "I don't know where she gets it." "You," Madeline said. "She gets it from you." He looked uncomfortable with this, not in a falsely modest way, just the way someone looked when a compliment landed in territory they didn't know how to navigate. "I don't know about that. She was the one who came over to my booth. She has her mother's instincts." He said it easily, but something in his posture shifted slightly. "Sophie, her mom, she was like that. Saw people. Walked right into situations that other people walked around." Madeline didn't push. She let it be there, the mention of a woman who wasn't, the shape of an absence that had learned to be present in a different form. "She sounds like she was something," Madeline said quietly. "She was." He took a long sip of coffee. "Yeah, she was." Across the park, Ava had abandoned the swings and was now climbing the structure with the focused efficiency of someone conducting a military operation. She reached the top, surveyed the park, located them, and waved with the arm of someone flagging a ship. They both waved back. The Saturdays became a thing, not formally. There was no conversation about making them a thing, no agreement struck. But the following Saturday, Wyatt texted. They'd exchanged numbers in the parking garage, practically and without ceremony, and said Ava wanted to know if she was free. And she had been free. She was always theoretically free on Saturdays. She just usually filled the freedom with work, which was its own kind of not free. She met them at the park again. Then, a week later, at a farmer's market 3 blocks from their apartment that Ava had been lobbying to visit for reasons involving a specific jam vendor. Then, slowly, in the way that things happened when nobody was forcing them, at their apartment itself, for what Wyatt called dinner, and what was actually Ava supervising the making of pasta while providing a running commentary on methodology. You have to stir it more, Ava said. I am stirring it, Madeline said. You're stirring it like someone who's never made pasta. I have made pasta. Ava considered this. When? A pause. Okay, I've watched someone make pasta. That doesn't count. Ava took the spoon, demonstrated. Like this. More pressure. Wyatt, from the doorway where he was leaning against the frame, watching this with the expression of a man fully aware of what he had created, said nothing. His face was doing something she didn't quite have a name for yet. The apartment was small by any measure, a 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a building that had good bones and aging plumbing, a living room that Ava had colonized with a bookshelf, and an ongoing art project involving watercolors, and a truly ambitious amount of newspapers spread across the floor. Wyatt's bedroom door was usually half open, and she caught glimpses of it, neat, practical, a work schedule pinned above the desk, a framed photo on the dresser that she didn't look at directly, but that she understood was Sophie. It was a real life in there, not a curated one, not the kind of life that was arranged for the benefit of other people's impressions. Just actual evidence of how three people, two living, one in photographs, had built something together in the available space. Madeline had a penthouse apartment 17 minutes away. It had a rooftop terrace, a chef's kitchen she used to reheat things, and walls she'd paid an interior designer to fill. She had been comfortable there. She had told herself she was comfortable there. Sitting in Wyatt's small kitchen with Ava telling her she was stirring wrong, the difference between comfortable and actually at ease became suddenly, uncomfortably clear. "Why do you always eat at your desk?" Ava asked. "Because I'm usually working." "But you have to eat. You could eat with people." "The people I eat with are usually also working." "That's not eating with people," Ava said, with the confidence of someone who had just solved a problem the adult hadn't recognized as a problem. "That's just happening to be in the same room." Wyatt from the doorway. "She's not wrong." "You're both ganging up on me," Madeline said. "We're not ganging up," Ava said. "We're agreeing." "There's a difference." It wasn't all simple. She'd be lying to herself if she let herself think it was. There were evenings she came to the apartment and felt like a tourist in someone else's life, like she was visiting the version of ordinary that she'd never gotten around to building for herself, and that the visiting was sweet but also carried underneath it a specific kind of grief. The grief of seeing something and knowing you'd missed the on-ramp. She told herself it was friendship. She mostly believed it. Wyatt was careful. Not in a cold way, just in the way of someone who'd already been through the worst thing and had learned to not move fast toward things that mattered. He was easy company, the kind that didn't demand anything from the silences. He had opinions about things, logistics management, youth soccer leagues, whether certain genres of true crime podcast were ethically complicated, and he stated them plainly and without trying to match them to what he thought she wanted to hear. That, she realized, was rarer than it should have been. She spent most of her professional life with people who wanted something from her. Her approval, her budget, her signature on something. Even the people she trusted were people in whose interest it was to be trustworthy. The ecosystem of her career had a kind of transactional gravity that was so pervasive she'd stopped feeling it, the way you stopped feeling air pressure. Wyatt didn't want anything from her, or if he did, she couldn't find the angle, and she'd spent a decade developing an excellent eye for angles. One evening, after Ava had gone to bed, she went down at 8:30 on school nights, an arrangement Wyatt enforced with the gentle inexorability of someone who had learned the consequences of not enforcing it. They sat on the small balcony with the leftover coffee and the city visible in patches between the other buildings. It was mid-October by then, cold enough to need a jacket. "You seem better," he said. "Then what?" "Then the birthday." She wrapped both hands around the mug. "Is that your professional assessment?" "I drive a truck. I don't have professional assessments." He glanced at her. "You just seem less, I don't know, less braced." She thought about how to respond to that. "I went to a meeting last Tuesday with the board, and there was a comment about my public profile, implications about image." She stopped. 2 weeks ago, I would have spent the rest of the day figuring out how to preempt it. I just wrote it down and kept going." "That's different?" "That's very different." He nodded, not making it bigger than it was, not minimizing it, just taking it in. "Marcus, my coworker, the one who set me up with Dana, he asked me yesterday why I've been in a better mood. He said this looking at the street below, not at her. I told him I started sleeping better." "Is that true?" "Partially." He took a sip of coffee. "The other part I didn't know how to explain without it sounding, I don't know, like something it isn't yet." She looked at him. He was still looking at the street. "What is it?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," he said finally. "That's the honest answer. Since Sophie, I haven't really let myself. Think about that. The yet part." He paused. "Ava makes it easier." She's pretty clear about what she wants the world to look like. She wants me here, Madeline said. Yeah, he looked at her then. She's not the only one. She held his gaze. Something passed between them that neither of them reached for. Not quite. Not yet. Just the recognition of something present, named just enough to be real. I should go, she said, and her voice was steady. Okay. She stood. He walked her to the door the way he always did. At the threshold she turned, and he was close enough that the city light caught the line of his jaw, and she thought, this is the part where things get complicated. This is the part she was bad at. This was the part that had always cost her. Same time next week, she said. Ava's got a school thing Thursday. Science fair. Can I come? It surprised him. She could see it. The small shift, the blink. It's a school science fair. I know what it is. It's not exciting. Wyatt. Yeah, he said. You can come. She went home to the penthouse with its rooftop terrace and its chef's kitchen and its walls chosen by a professional. She stood in the entryway for a moment and looked at the clean, designed space and felt with sudden clarity what it was missing. Not furniture, not art, not the right lighting, just the ordinary noise of people who were glad you were there. The science fair was in the gymnasium of Ava's school, and it smelled exactly like every school gymnasium that had ever existed. Industrial cleaner, sneaker rubber, old wood, 12 rows of tables, 40-something projects, children hovering beside poster boards with the anxious pride of artists at a gallery opening. Ava's project was on water filtration. She had built a working model out of a plastic bottle, gravel, sand, and a charcoal layer, and she had tested it with actual murky water from the park and documented the results with a thoroughness that her teacher had written extremely methodical, next to in red pen. You tested it 7 times? Madeline said, reading the data table. 8, Ava corrected. The 7th was an outlier, so I ran it again. Who taught you about outliers? Dad. He has to check root data at work. Sometimes numbers are weird and you have to check again. Madeline looked at Wyatt, who shrugged with the mild modesty of someone who hadn't realized he'd been teaching anything. This is genuinely impressive, Ava. I know. She said this without arrogance, just as a plain fact. Then remembering something, you're not supposed to say that. Why? Because judges might hear you and think you're a plant. She scanned the gymnasium with the professional suspicion of an 8-year-old taking this seriously. They stayed 2 hours. Ava took 3rd place, which she accepted with the expression of someone who suspected the judging criteria were flawed, but was choosing to be gracious. Wyatt bought her a hot chocolate from the table the PTA had set up. Madeline stood beside them in the gymnasium holding her own hot chocolate and watched a parent take a photo of their kid with a blue ribbon and felt something she couldn't immediately name. Then she placed it. It was the feeling of being included in something that didn't require anything from her. Not a role, not a function, not a result to deliver. She was just there, in a school gymnasium that smelled like sneakers, with a girl who took water filtration seriously and a man who had learned about outliers on the job and applied the knowledge at home without thinking about it. She had attended ribbon cuttings and investment summits and a state dinner. She had shaken hands with people whose names appeared in national news cycles. None of it had given her this particular feeling. She didn't know what to do with that exactly, but she held it carefully, the way you held something you didn't want to break before you'd figured out where to put it. On the drive home, Wyatt's car. Ava in the back seat with her 3rd place ribbon held in her lap like it was first. Ava said, from behind them, Are you going to come to my spring recital? Ava, Wyatt started. It's in March. You have to save the date early. Madeline looked out the windshield at the moving city. March was 5 months away. She thought about what 5 months meant, what it would mean to still be here in 5 months, to have become the kind of person in their lives who got invited to spring recitals and saved the date early. She thought about Wyatt saying she's not the only one. I'll save the date, she said. Ava looked satisfied. She put the ribbon in her backpack with the care of someone who had decided it was more valuable than the color implied. Neither Wyatt nor Madeline said anything for the next few minutes. The city moved past the windows. At a red light, he reached over and turned the heat up slightly without being asked, because she'd said once, weeks ago, that she ran cold in the car. She hadn't thought he'd remembered. She looked at his hand on the dial, then at his profile, and thought, I am in serious trouble. Then the light changed and they drove on, and the trouble felt, for the first time in a very long time, like exactly the right kind. The first indication that something was wrong came on a Wednesday, 7 weeks after the science fair. Madeline was in the middle of a budget review when her assistant actually knocked, which Priya almost never did, because Priya understood that knocking meant interruption, and interruption meant she was weighing the cost, and opened the door with a face that was doing its best to be neutral and not quite managing it. There's something you need to see, Priya said. Online. After the review. Now, I think now. The budget review had 4 other people in it. Madeline looked at them, looked at Priya, and read the particular quality of careful in her assistant's expression. Give me 10 minutes, she told the room. She followed Priya out. At Priya's desk, the monitor was already open to a gossip and finance hybrid site called the Meridian Wire, the kind of publication that existed in the uncomfortable territory between legitimate business reporting and weaponized rumor. It had a readership in the hundreds of thousands, most of them people who worked in or adjacent to the industries it covered. The headline read, Vantage Global's Image Problem, Inside the Quiet Board Rebellion. She read it standing. She didn't sit down. Sitting felt like conceding something. The piece was careful in the specific, legally calibrated way that meant someone with resources had either written it or fed it. It didn't use words that would expose a source. It cited multiple people familiar with internal discussions and concerns raised in private shareholder communications. But the thrust was clear and the framing was brutal. Vantage Global's CEO, brilliant in certain respects, was a liability. The public perception of her appearance was described, with quotes from unnamed parties, as a distraction from the company's otherwise strong performance. There was a photograph. She knew which one the moment she saw it. A shot from a conference 2 years ago, badly angled, the kind that circulated because it was bad, not in spite of it. She stood at Priya's desk and read the whole thing. How long has it been up? She asked. Went live at 6 this morning. It's been shared about 4,000 times as of an hour ago. Which board members knew about this piece? Priya hesitated. I don't know yet. Find out what you can. Madeline straightened. And get me Ellison from legal. She went back into the budget review. She sat down. She finished the review. It was one of the harder things she'd done in a while, maintaining the continuity of a financial discussion while something in her chest was doing what it did, constricting, cataloging, running the numbers on damage while her face did something else entirely. But she finished it. She had learned years ago that falling apart in rooms was a luxury that cost more than she could afford, and the bill always came at the worst time. By Thursday, it was clear the wire piece had not been random. Ellison, who had been Vantage's head of legal for 4 years, and who approached problems with the methodical calm of someone who had professionally assumed the worst and been right enough times to find it restful, laid it out for her at 7:30 in the morning over coffee. Neither of them was actually drinking. 3 things, he said. First, the piece was coordinated. The timing of the social shares, the secondary coverage picking it up, that's not organic. Someone seeded it. Who? Working on that. Second, and this is the part I want you to sit with, the shareholder communications the wire cited. Those aren't public documents. Someone with board-level access leaked internal correspondence. She set her coffee down. That's a breach. Yes. That's a serious breach. Yes. Third, he paused. I've started seeing the language of a proxy campaign. Not formal, not yet. But the framing in this piece, CEO as liability, leadership image as competitive risk, that's the setup narrative for a removal vote. She looked at him. A removal vote needs a majority of the board. It needs enough. And right now, we don't know how many they have. She thought about Douglas Fenn and his warm handshake and his comments about the Pacific Division margins. She thought about Martin Greaves and his handwritten note after the record quarter. She thought about the voice in the alcove at the Hartwell Grand, she's a liability, and the fact that she had never confirmed whether it was Martin and had told herself not to. How long do I have? She asked. The quarterly board meeting is in 19 days. 19 days. She sat with that. Okay. Madeline, I said okay. Let's talk about what we can actually do. God. She didn't tell Wyatt right away. She wasn't sure why. Partly it was habit. She'd spent a decade managing information carefully, keeping the radius of bad news small, because the more people knew about a crisis, the harder it was to control the shape of it. Partly it was something else, something she was less willing to examine. She didn't want to bring it into that apartment, into the kitchen where Ava told her she was stirring wrong, into the Saturday parks and the farmers' markets, and the evenings on the small balcony with the leftover coffee. She wanted one thing that wasn't contaminated by this. So she went to the apartment that Friday evening as planned, and she helped Ava with a book report on a novel about a girl who discovers her grandfather was secretly an astronaut, and she ate the soup Wyatt made, actual soup from a recipe, not a can, a fact Ava announced with the pride of an accomplice. And she sat across the table from them and was, for 2 hours, something other than a CEO in crisis. She did it well. She'd been managing rooms since she was 23. She could manage a dinner table. But Wyatt noticed. He didn't say anything during dinner. He waited until Ava had gone to read and they were doing the thing they'd fallen into without discussing. Clearing the table together, the low-friction division of labor that happened when two people had spent enough evenings in the same kitchen. He handed her a dish. She dried it. He handed her another. Something happened, he said. I'm fine. You're doing the face. She stopped. What face? The one where you're fine. He handed her the last bowl. You've been doing it since you came in. Priya at the front desk probably can't tell. I can. She set the bowl down. Outside the window, the city was doing its evening noise, car horns, someone's music from an open window, the particular hum of a dense neighborhood winding down. There's a situation at work, she said. How bad? Someone's trying to remove me as CEO. He was quiet for a moment, then, who? I don't know exactly. Board members, maybe shareholders they've coordinated with. There was a press piece, a coordinated piece, and the framing is that I'm a liability. She paused. Because of how I look. She said it flatly, because it was a flat fact. She was not going to dress it up. Wyatt put the dish towel down on the counter. He turned to face her fully, and she recognized the quality of his stillness. The same one from the restaurant, from the park, from all the moments when he was deciding how to carry something rather than whether to. They're using your appearance to justify removing you from a company you built. A company I've grown by 300% in 6 years, yes. And the press piece is circulating, and some investors are nervous, and I have 19 days before a board meeting that could end my career. He exhaled through his nose. Then he said something she hadn't expected. What do you want to do? Not, what are you going to do? Not, here's what you should do. What do you want to do? She looked at him. I want to fight. Okay. But I also... She stopped, pressed her lips together. Part of me wants to walk away first, before they can do it to me. So I control the... She gestured vaguely, meaning the ending, the terms, the story they tell. I know, he said. But is that what you actually want? Or is that the version that hurts less on the way out? She didn't answer right away. She looked at the kitchen that was not her kitchen, the slightly too small refrigerator, the rack of mismatched mugs, the drawing Ava had put on the wall with blue painter's tape because Wyatt said she couldn't use real tape. A compromise that satisfied no one, and both of them. The life of two people who kept going. The second one? She said. Yeah, he said. I figured. She looked at him. I don't know how to fight something this big without it costing more than winning is worth. Maybe you don't fight it the normal way. Meaning what? He picked the dish towel back up, folded it, set it on the counter in that absent way he did physical things, without ceremony, just cleanly. You've been managing what they say about you for years, trying to stay ahead of it, redirect it. What if you just stopped? Stopped what? Managing it, and started just being it. She frowned. I know it sounds like a greeting card. I'm not explaining it right. He turned. You told me once that the narrative is always about how you look. What if you just put yourself in front of it, not the CEO, you? Let people see the actual thing instead of what they're constructing. People don't want the actual thing. That's precisely the problem. Some people don't, he said. But you've been building your strategy around the ones who don't. What about the ones who might? She stood there in the kitchen and thought about that. The ones who might. She thought about the employees on the 14th floor who left birthday cards on her desk. Not because they were required to, because they wanted to. The junior analyst who had sent her a 2-paragraph email after a particularly brutal week saying that she was the reason he'd stayed at the company. The woman from the marketing team who had stopped her in the elevator 6 months ago to say, quietly and with evident difficulty, that watching Madeline run a boardroom had made her feel like she was allowed to take up space. She had filed those things away. She had not let them count. I need to think, she said. Okay. I genuinely need to think, not, I know. I'm not pushing. He glanced toward the hallway. Ava's probably asleep. She does this thing where she reads for 20 minutes and then goes under hard. He looked back at Madeline. You can stay if you want. Or not. Either way is fine. She stayed another hour. She sat on the couch and stared at nothing in particular while he read, one of those small domestic silences that had become strangely necessary to her, the way certain sounds became necessary, the refrigerator hum, the city outside. She wasn't solving anything. But something in the shape of the problem was shifting. When she left, he walked her to the door. Whatever you decide, he said, it's the right call. You know that, right? I know you think that. That's not... He stopped, seemed to choose something. You don't need my permission. You don't need anyone's permission. I'm telling you that because you've spent a long time believing you do. She looked at him for a second too long. He held it. Good night, Wyatt. Good night. She took the elevator down. The lobby was empty. The night air hit her at the door and she walked to her car and sat in it for a moment without starting the engine. She thought about what he'd said. The ones who might. She started the car. Odd. The photos went live on a Monday. She was in back-to-back calls from 8 until noon, and Priya was keeping the non-essential interruptions out, so she didn't see them until 12:17 when she picked up her phone during the 2-minute gap between a call ending and a lunch she wasn't going to eat. There were 14 texts. 3 missed calls from her PR firm. A voicemail from Douglas Fenn that she could tell from the tone of the preview was going to be careful and diplomatic in the way that covered a lot of ground. The photos were on 2 platforms and had been screenshotted and redistributed to 3 others by the time she was looking at them. Someone, and she didn't know who yet, but Ellison was already working on it, had obtained photographs from 3 different points in her life. One was from a beach trip 7 years ago, pre-Vantage, pre-everything. A private vacation photo that had never been public. One was from a medical appointment. She didn't know how that was possible. She didn't understand yet how that was possible. And one was a photo that was fine on its own, but had been cropped and angled to look as unflattering as possible. And the caption beside it was the kind of language she was not going to repeat even inside her own head. The comments were already accumulating, thousands of them. The way they accumulated these days. Fast and cold, and with the particular cruelty of anonymity, people saying things in comment sections that they would never say to a face, because the face made you real, and a face on a screen was just an object you could use. She read maybe 30 comments before she put the phone face down on her desk. Her hands were steady. She noted this clinically, the way you noted something that surprised you. Her hands were steady, and her face was doing the thing it did. The neutral professional mask, the one she could hold for hours if she had to. But underneath, something was moving in the dark, something that had been there since she was 16 and the world started explaining to her that the size of her body was an invitation to comment. Priya knocked and came in. She looked at Madeline. Madeline looked back at her. I need the room for 10 minutes, Madeline said. Of course. Hold everything. Yes. Priya left. Madeline walked to the window. Floor to ceiling, the city spread out below in the particular way that height made everything look manageable, which was a lie, but a useful one. She stood at the glass. She breathed. She gave herself 10 minutes to feel the full weight of it. The violation, the humiliation, the cold, specific cruelty of people who had access to her and used it this way. She gave herself the 10 minutes because she had learned that not giving them to herself didn't make the feelings go away. It just made them work underground where she couldn't see them. At minute 9, she thought about resigning. She had thought about it before, in the abstract, the clean exit, the controlled narrative, the choice to leave before being pushed. But this morning, it felt concrete. She could write the statement. She could have Ellison manage the terms. She could walk out of this building in a way that preserved at least the shell of dignity before whatever was coming took even that. At minute 10, she thought about Ava saying, "She keeps coming back every day. That means she's winning." She turned from the window. She called Priya back in. "Get me Ellison, the full communications team, and I want the backup of every financial report I've filed in the last 3 years on my desk by 2 o'clock. She picked up her phone. "And get me the names of the board members I can still reach directly." Priya was already moving. "Done. Anything else?" "Yeah." She looked at the phone in her hand. "There's a shareholder meeting in 12 days. I want to know the exact format. Who speaks, in what order, for how long, and whether outside parties can address the floor." Priya paused. "Outside parties?" "Just find out the rules. Us." She called Wyatt at 7 that evening. She was still at the office. The city was doing its blue hour thing outside. That specific light that happened between 5:30 and 6 in November. 20 minutes of something almost beautiful before it went dark. "I saw," he said, before she got to it. She closed her eyes briefly. "How?" "Marcus showed me. He follows some finance news thing." A pause. "Are you okay?" "I'm working on it." "That's not what I asked." She pressed her fingers against her forehead. "No, I'm not, but I'm going to be." "Madeline, I made a decision today. I'm not resigning." A beat. "Good." The evidence we have on the data manipulation, Ellison thinks it's enough to bring to the regulatory board. If we move on it before the shareholder meeting, we reframe everything. They've been engineering a crisis using falsified metrics. I have the original data. I have the audit trail. She paused. "But I have to move fast and I have to move right. And if it goes wrong, it won't. You don't know that." "No," he said. "But I know you've been running this company for 6 years while people talked about your body instead of your work. I know what you've built. And I know you don't make moves you can't back up." His voice was steady. "So I'm telling you it won't go wrong because you're the one doing it." She sat in her office in the blue hour light and held the phone and did not, despite significant internal pressure, cry. "Ava's asking about you," he said, quieter now. "I told her you had a hard week at work." "What did she say?" He laughed a little. "She said you should come over and we'd have soup." The laugh that came out of Madeline surprised her, genuine, a little broken at the edges, the kind that happened when you'd been holding a lot and something got through. She really has a one-size solution. "It's worked so far." He paused. "Come over Saturday if you can. No pressure, but she'll make the case herself if you give her the chance." "I'll be there Saturday." "Okay." She stayed in the office until 9. She reviewed documents, sent 4 carefully worded emails, had a call with Ellison that ended on something adjacent to cautious optimism. She ate half a sandwich Priya had left on her desk before leaving. She looked at the window in the dark city and felt the weight of what was coming. Not just the board meeting, not just the legal maneuvering, but the larger thing. The exhausting, years-long thing of being a woman whose right to take up space in the world was never finished being challenged. She was tired of it. She had been tired of it for a long time. But tired was not the same as done. She gathered her things. She turned off the office light. In the elevator down, she looked at her reflection in the polished doors. Her face, her body, herself, the whole complicated and non-negotiable fact of her. And she did not look away. She held her own gaze all the way down to the lobby. It was a small thing, but small things, she had been learning lately, were sometimes the ones that held the structure up. Saturday came, and she went. She hadn't slept well in 5 days. That particular kind of not sleeping where you were horizontal and your eyes were closed and your body was doing the technical minimum, but your brain refused to stop running the numbers. She'd gone over the regulatory filing 17 times. She'd had 3 calls with Ellison and 2 with the communications team, and 1 very uncomfortable call with a shareholder she'd known for 4 years who said, carefully, that he was hearing things he couldn't ignore and that she should prepare herself. She had thanked him. She had hung up. She had stared at the wall for a while. By Saturday morning, she looked like someone who had spent a week at war with her own nervous system, which was exactly what she was. She put on jeans and a sweater and didn't spend more than 4 minutes in front of the mirror, which was progress of a kind. Wyatt opened the door before she knocked. He'd heard the elevator, she figured, or he'd been listening for it. She wasn't sure which possibility was more disarming. He looked at her face and said nothing, which was exactly right. He just stepped back to let her in. From somewhere in the apartment, "She's here!" Ava's voice, already in motion. She appeared from the hallway in the yellow shirt she wore when she was doing something creative. It had 3 different paint stains that had survived multiple washes, carrying a wooden spoon with the authority of someone who had been put in charge of something. "I'm making the soup," Ava announced. "You're supervising the soup," Wyatt said. "Same thing." Madeline stepped inside. The apartment smelled like onion and something herby, thyme maybe, or rosemary. She stood in the entryway for a moment and felt the specific quality of the place settle around her, the way it always did. The 2 small refrigerator, the mismatched mugs, Ava's current art project, which appeared to have evolved into a large paper mural spread across the living room floor involving what looked like an aerial view of a city. "What is that?" Madeline asked. Ava turned. "Our neighborhood? From above." She pointed. "That's our building. That's the park. That's Nora's kitchen." Madeline walked closer. The map was detailed in the way children's maps were detailed, specific about the things that mattered to the cartographer, unconcerned with the things that didn't. The park had a small figure on the swings. Nora's kitchen had a tiny chalkboard drawn on the front. "Where am I?" Madeline asked. Ava pointed to a building several blocks away, marked with a star. "That's a guess. I don't know your actual building." "It's close," Madeline said. "The star is close." Ava looked satisfied. She went back to the kitchen. Wyatt appeared at Madeline's shoulder with a mug of coffee, handed it over without ceremony. She took it with both hands. "She's been working on that for 2 weeks, he said quietly. "It's remarkable." "Don't tell her that. She'll expand it to cover the whole city." Madeline looked at the map, at the small figure on the swings, at the restaurant with the chalkboard, at the star that was close but not exact, at the thing an 8-year-old had decided was worth documenting, the geography of the people she loved. She didn't trust herself to say anything, so she drank her coffee. The soup helped. She'd stopped being surprised by this. They ate at the small table with the window that looked out onto the alley and the fire escapes, and Ava explained in some detail the structural choices she'd made in the map, why she'd used blue for streets and green for parks, why she'd left certain buildings unmarked, and Wyatt contributed occasionally, and Madeline asked questions, and for an hour and 20 minutes, the shareholder meeting was in a different room of her mind, behind a door she'd deliberately closed. When Ava went to do homework, Sunday night math, which she treated with the resigned competence of someone who found numbers tolerable but not interesting, Wyatt poured more coffee, and they sat at the cleared table, and the door opened back up. "How bad is it?" he said. "Not a question. The regulatory filing is in. Ellison got it submitted Thursday." She wrapped her hands around the mug. "If the investigators move fast, we have a real argument before the board meeting. If they don't..." She didn't finish. "And if they don't? Then I walk into that meeting with evidence that some board members have been manipulating internal data, and I make the case directly, without the regulatory cover. That's riskier." "Yes." "But you're going to do it either way." She looked at him. "Yes." He nodded slowly. "What do you need between now and then?" "To not think about it for approximately the next 3 hours." "That I can do." He leaned back. "Ava's got a thing she wants to show you. Art thing. She's been waiting all week." "She could have shown me when I came in." "She wanted you to eat first. She said, and I'm quoting, that you always look hungry when you arrive." Madeline's mouth pulled sideways. "She's not wrong." "She almost never is, He stood up. "Ava," he called toward the hallway. Bring the sketchbook. The sketchbook was a revelation. Madeline had known Ava was artistic, the mural, the watercolor projects, the general creative occupation of available surfaces. But the sketchbook was different. It was a proper one, the kind with thick cream pages, and it was half full of drawings that had a quality she hadn't expected from an 8-year-old. Observational. Precise in some ways and deliberately loose in others, the way a person drew when they understood that the feeling of a thing was more important than the accuracy. There was one of Wyatt asleep on the couch, rendered with that specific looseness. There was one of the park, the swing set, the patchy grass. There were several pages of just hands, studying hands, practicing hands, the repetitive work of someone learning by looking. And then, near the middle, a page Ava turned past quickly, but not quickly enough. "Wait," Madeline said. "Go back." Ava went back. It was a drawing of Nora's kitchen, the interior, the booths, the pendant lights, and in the corner booth, small but detailed, a figure in a party dress. The face was simplified in the way Ava simplified faces, suggested rather than rendered, but the dress was specific, navy, structured at the shoulders. "You drew this from memory?" Madeline said. "I looked at you for a while before Dad went over." Madeline looked at the drawing. The small figure in the corner booth, the birthday card propped against the salt shaker. The quality of the figure, even simplified, even in pencil, was not lonely exactly, but it was alone, and the distinction was visible. The way a good drawing held the truth of something without explaining it. She cleared her throat. "It's wonderful, Ava." "It's okay," Ava said, with the accurate self-assessment of someone who knew the difference between okay and good and was being honest. "I want to do it better." "You'll get there." "I know." She closed the sketchbook with the particular confidence of a person who had no doubt about the direction they were going, only about the timeline. "Can I show you the one I'm doing of you now?" Madeline blinked. "You're drawing me?" "Not from life, from memory." Ava pulled out a separate loose sheet still in progress. "I'm trying to get the way you stand right. You stand like—" She tilted her head, looking. "Like you're deciding something." Wyatt made a small sound from across the room. Madeline shot him a look. He raised his hands in a gesture of innocence. "That's—" Madeline looked at the sketch. The proportions were rougher than the sketchbook work. The face was clearly unfinished, the hands not yet detailed, but the posture was right. The spine, the slight forward lean that she'd been told twice by a physical therapist was going to become a problem if she didn't address it and had not yet addressed it. It was her, unmistakably. "You can have it when it's done," Ava said. "If you want." "I want," Madeline said immediately. The board meeting was in 4 days when Ellison called at 6:15 on a Tuesday morning. She was already awake. She'd given up the pretense of sleep at 5 and was at the kitchen island in her penthouse with the city still dark outside, going through documents she'd already gone through twice. "The regulatory board has opened a preliminary inquiry," Ellison said. He had the measured tone of a man who understood that measured was what was needed. "It's not a full investigation yet, but it's formal. It's on record." She absorbed this. "Does it change the timeline?" "It changes the optics at the meeting. It means when you present the data manipulation evidence, you're not asking the shareholders to take your word for it. You're showing them that a regulatory body is already taking it seriously." "That's meaningful." "That's very meaningful." A pause. "Madeline, I want to be clear. This is good news, but the meeting is still going to be hard." "I know. There are at least 4 board members who have committed to the removal vote. We believe there are 2 or 3 who are genuinely undecided. Your job in that room is to move those undecideds." "I know how to move a room, Ellison." "I know you do. I also know you've been sleeping approximately 5 hours a night for 10 days. He paused, and she could hear him deciding whether to say the next thing. "Just, go in as yourself, not as the version you perform, the actual version." She thought about Wyatt saying, "What if you stopped managing it and started just being it?" "I'll see you Thursday morning," she said. Wednesday night, she went to the apartment. She hadn't planned to. She told herself she needed the evening to prepare. to review, to run the board member profiles one more time and think through the contingencies. She did all of those things, at her desk, in her penthouse, with its clean walls and its professional quiet. Then at 9 o'clock, she texted Wyatt. "Is it too late?" His response came in under a minute. "No, come." She took a car. It was 22 minutes. She'd stopped counting the minutes as precisely as she used to, she noticed. And he had the door open before she knocked, same as last time, same as it had become. The apartment was quieter, Ava asleep, the lights lower, a baseball game on the TV with the sound off, something she found obscurely comforting about that image. "I don't want to talk about tomorrow," she said at the door. "Okay. I just needed—" She stopped. She wasn't sure how to finish that. The sentence didn't have a clean ending. "I know," he said. "Come in." She sat on the couch. He sat on the other end, not close, not far, the comfortable geography they'd established over months of evenings. The silent baseball game moved on the screen, figures in white and blue chasing something she couldn't follow. "She put the map on her bedroom wall," he said after a while. "The neighborhood one." "Where?" "Above her desk. She said it helps her think." Madeline smiled at that, genuinely. "About what?" "I honestly don't know. When Ava says it helps her think, I've learned not to ask for specifics. The answer is always more elaborate than you prepared for." She laughed, and it came out less broken than it had last week. "She's going to do something significant with her life. God help us all when she figures out what it is." He said it with the mixed pride and mild terror of a parent who had been watching a personality assemble itself for 8 years and was only beginning to understand the scale of what they'd built. They were quiet for a while. The city did its night sounds outside. The baseball game ended. She didn't see the score. He turned off the TV. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Okay. If this goes wrong tomorrow, if the vote, if I lose," she paused, "does it change anything? Here, this." He turned to look at her. She kept her eyes straight ahead, on the blank television screen, because she wasn't sure she could hold the question and hold his gaze at the same time. "No," he said, simply. "You don't have to—" "Madeline, no, it doesn't change anything." He said it the way he said things that were true, without decoration, without the careful inflation of emotion that people used to make things sound realer than they were. "You're not here because of Vantage Global. You've never been here because of Vantage Global." She pressed her lips together. "Good," she said. "That's good." She didn't go home that night. She fell asleep on the couch somewhere around midnight. She didn't plan to, it just happened, the accumulated deficit of 10 sleepless nights finally collecting. She woke at 5 to the sound of Wyatt's alarm from down the hall, early for his shift. He'd put a blanket over her at some point. She lay still for a minute in the gray pre-dawn, listening to the apartment wake up. The alarm silenced. Footsteps. The particular percussion of a morning routine. The refrigerator opening. The coffee maker. Ava appeared in the hallway in her pajamas at 5:20, saw Madeline, and stopped. "You slept here," she said. "I fell asleep. I didn't mean to." Ava considered this. Then she sat down on the other end of the couch and tucked her feet under her and said, "Are you nervous about today?" Madeline looked at her. "How do you know about today?" "Dad said you have something important at work." Ava's face had the careful quality it had when she was trying to be older than she was. "Is it the people who are trying to take your company?" So Wyatt had told her something, or she'd overheard, or both. "Yes," Madeline said. "That's today." Ava was quiet for a moment. "Do you know what you're going to say?" "More or less. At my science fair, I practiced out loud to the mirror 3 times. Did it help?" "Not really, but I felt better doing it." She picked at a loose thread on the couch cushion. "My teacher says the important thing is to know what you actually believe, because then, even if you forget the words, you still have the thing underneath." Madeline sat with that. The thing underneath. She thought about what she believed. Not the financial case, not the regulatory filing, not the board member profiles. What she actually believed. The thing underneath all of it. She believed the company was better than what was being done to it. She believed the people on the 14th floor deserved someone in the room fighting for the work they'd done. She believed that the men in the alcove at the Hartwell Grand had been wrong, not just cruel. Wrong about what leadership looked like. Wrong about what a company owed its public. Wrong about what the world was allowed to say about a woman's body as the price of her ambition. She'd known all of this, but hearing it in her own head clearly, without the noise, it settled something. "Your teacher's smart," she told Ava. "She's okay," Ava said diplomatically. Wyatt appeared in the hallway in his work uniform, saw them both on the couch, and stopped. Something crossed his face that Madeline couldn't name, but that she held on to anyway, the way you held a thing you wanted to keep. "Coffee's made," he said. "I have to go get ready," Madeline said. She stood, folded the blanket. She picked up her bag from the floor, her keys from the side table where she'd set them without thinking. Ava stood up too, and then she did something she hadn't done before. She crossed the space between them and put her arms around Madeline's waist, quick and firm and without preamble, the way Ava did most things. Madeline stood very still. She put her arm around the girl's shoulders and held on for a moment, and something moved through her chest, wide and wordless, the kind of feeling that didn't have a name because it was made of too many other feelings compressed into one. "You're going to be fine," Ava said into her sweater. "Yeah," Madeline said. Her voice held. "I think I might be." Okay. The shareholder meeting was in the Meridian Tower's 32nd floor conference center, the big one, with the glass wall and the long table and the chairs arranged for maximum formality. Madeline had been in this room 100 times. She knew the sight lines, the acoustics, the particular way the light came through at mid-morning. She arrived at 8:45 for a 9 o'clock meeting, which meant she was the first one there. She stood at the glass wall and looked at the city below. And she breathed, and she thought about the thing underneath. The room filled slowly. Douglas Fenn arrived at 8:50 and nodded at her. The careful, climate-reading nod of someone who hadn't yet decided how to arrange his face around what was coming. Martin Greaves came in with 2 other board members she'd placed on the opposition side, and she looked at him directly, and he looked back and neither of them said anything, which told her everything about whether her guess in the alcove had been right. The shareholder representatives, the legal observers. Ellison, who took a seat along the side wall with the organized calm of a man who had done everything he could do and was now in the watching phase. At 9:02, Douglas called the meeting to order. She let the procedural opening run. She sat at her place at the table with her hands folded and her face doing the thing it did. But differently, she thought, not the performance. Something stiller than that. She thought about Ava's teacher, know what you actually believe. Then even if you forget the words, you still have the thing underneath. At 9:18, Douglas began the formal agenda item. The framing was diplomatic. Concerns had been raised. Certain shareholders had requested a review of leadership's alignment with company values and public positioning. The language was careful enough to be corporate and specific enough to be a knife. Martin Greaves spoke for 7 minutes. He was practiced. He hit the familiar notes: public perception, brand alignment, competitive risk, the international markets that Madeline herself had opened. He did not say her name with contempt. He didn't need to. The contempt was structural. She did not interrupt. She kept her hands folded. She took 3 notes on the paper in front of her because she wanted to look like she was tracking his points, and because the act of writing kept her hands from doing anything else. Then it was her turn. She stood. "I want to start with something that isn't on the agenda," she said. Her voice was steady. Not performed steady, actually steady, the kind that came from knowing what you were standing on. In the past 11 days, someone in this organization authorized the leak of falsified performance metrics to 3 external parties and personal photographs of mine to 2 media outlets, one of which was obtained from what appears to be medical records. She paused. "I want the people in this room to understand that I know this happened, I know it wasn't random, and federal investigators are currently reviewing the evidence." The room shifted. She could feel it. The specific quality of a contained space when multiple people recalibrate simultaneously. "I'm not saying this as a threat," she continued. "I'm saying it as context. Because you're being asked today to make a decision about whether I'm fit to lead this company. And you deserve to make that decision knowing that the crisis you're being asked to respond to was manufactured by some of the people who are asking you to respond to it." She opened the folder in front of her. She laid out the documents, the original performance data, the manipulated versions that had circulated, The audit trail that Ellison's team had built over 19 days of work. She was precise. She was specific. She cited figures the way she cited figures in every financial presentation she'd ever given. Clearly, completely, without theatrical emphasis, because the numbers were enough. She talked for 22 minutes. She covered the actual performance record, the 300% growth, the international expansion, the employee retention rates, the very metrics that had been selectively deployed against her. She covered the regulatory inquiry. She covered what she believed the company needed going forward. And then she stopped managing it. She stopped performing the case. I've been asked, by implication, by the framing of this agenda, by the media narrative that was constructed over the past 2 weeks, to justify my right to lead this company in terms of my appearance. She looked at the table, at Douglas, at Martin Greaves, at the shareholder representatives who had come to this meeting having read what was online. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to stand here and list evidence that I'm sufficiently palatable. You know my record. You have the numbers in front of you. The question of whether I look the way a CEO is supposed to look is not a legitimate business consideration, and I think every person in this room, if they're being honest, knows that. She sat down. The room was very quiet for a moment. Then the door at the back opened. She didn't see who it was immediately. She was facing the glass wall, the city beyond it. She heard the sound of the door, and then she heard Douglas say with controlled surprise, "Excuse me, this is a closed shareholder session." "I know," said Wyatt's voice. "I'm sorry, I have something to say." She turned. He was standing at the back of the room in his work uniform, the Hartwell Logistics logo on the chest. He had a lanyard with a building visitor's badge that meant he'd gone through the desk downstairs. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who drove a truck for a living and had no business in a 32nd floor shareholder meeting and knew it. "This is not," Martin began. "1 minute," Wyatt said. Not loud, but with the particular quality of voice that didn't need volume because it knew what it was saying. "That's all I'm asking." Douglas looked at Madeline. She had no expression for this moment because she hadn't prepared for this moment. She had no idea he was coming. She had no idea he'd even considered coming. "1 minute," Douglas said. Wyatt walked to the front of the room. He didn't look at the board members or the legal observers. He looked at Madeline for exactly 1 second, and then he looked at the table, at the people assembled, at the room. "My name is Wyatt Turner," he said. "I drive a delivery truck. I've delivered to this building probably 50 times. I'm not a shareholder. I'm not connected to this company in any professional way." He put his hands in his pockets, which was a thing she recognized, the thing he did when he was being plain. "I know Madeline Cross. Not because of Vantage, because she sat with my daughter and me in a diner on her birthday when she had every reason not to, and she's been in our lives every week since. And I came here today because I drive past this building every morning and I thought about what was going to happen in this room, and I couldn't—" He paused, cleared his throat once. "I couldn't just drive past." The room was completely still. "I don't know your industry. I don't know the numbers. What I know is the person. I've watched her sit with an 8-year-old and treat every question like it mattered. I've seen her fight for something she built from nothing while people talked about her body instead of her work. I've seen her, on the worst week of her professional life, show up still, just keep showing up." He looked around the table. "Whatever you decide today, you should decide it knowing that. The woman in the headlines, the liability, the image problem, that's not the person I know. The person I know has more integrity in how she moves through a hard week than most people manage in a good year." He stopped. He'd gone maybe a minute and a half. He looked at Madeline one more time, briefly, with the plain directness of a person who had said exactly what he meant and was not going to dress it up. Then he nodded at Douglas and walked back out the door. The room held the silence he left. She looked at the table in front of her. She pressed her fingertips against the wood, just for a second, just to feel something solid. Then she looked up. The 2 undecided board members she'd been tracking were not looking at Martin Greaves. They were looking at her. The vote was still an hour away. There was still procedure to run, discussion to be had, the formal machinery of a governance process to grind through. None of it was going to be easy. She wasn't going to walk out of this room having won anything without the remainder of that hour being the hardest sustained argument of her professional life. But something had shifted in the room, and she could feel it. The quality of the air was different. She straightened in her chair. She asked for the floor. The vote was 11-4. Ellison told her the final count in the hallway outside the conference center, in a voice that had shed its professional careful and arrived at something closer to human relief. She stood in the corridor with its corporate carpet and its recessed lighting and its framed photographs of Vantage's milestones lining the wall, buildings, ribbon cuttings, handshakes, the visual record of 6 years. And she listened to him say 11-4, and she nodded, and she said thank you, and she did not fall apart. She waited until she was in the elevator with the doors closed. Then she pressed her back against the wall and breathed, long and unsteady, the kind of breathing that happens when you've been holding something so tightly for so long that releasing it is almost painful. Her eyes were wet. She let them be wet. She was alone in the elevator, and she was 30 stories up, and the city was spread out beyond the glass in every direction, and she had just fought the hardest single hour of her professional life, and she had won, and she was allowed to feel it in her body before she had to go back to performing equanimity. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. She straightened. She walked out. Wyatt was sitting on one of the benches near the building entrance, still in his work uniform, visitor's badge still on the lanyard, hands on his knees. He looked like a man who had done something that surprised even himself and was in the process of figuring out how he felt about it. He saw her coming across the lobby and stood up. She crossed the distance between them and stopped about 2 feet away. She looked at him. The plaid pattern of the uniform, the badge, the face that she'd watched across dinner tables and park benches and kitchen counters over the past months. The face she knew now in the specific way you knew a person when you'd seen them tired and funny and serious and careful with something fragile. "You skipped your route," she said. "Marcus covered it. He owed me one." He searched her face. "How did it go?" 11-4. Something moved through his expression. He exhaled. "Good." Ellison says the regulatory inquiry will formally expand into a full investigation within 2 weeks. Greaves and 2 others will likely be removed pending the outcome. She paused. Douglas Fenn abstained. I think he knew more than he admitted to knowing, but he also voted the right way when it counted, so. She stopped. "I don't know. I'll think about that later." "Yeah," he said. "Later's a good place for that." She looked at him. "You walked into a closed shareholder meeting in a delivery uniform." "I did." "You had no standing to be in that room." "I'm aware." "Wyatt." She didn't know what she meant to say next. The sentence had started on its own and arrived somewhere she hadn't mapped. "Why did you but—" "Because someone needed to say it," he said simply. "And I'm the one who knew it." She stood in the lobby of Meridian Tower and looked at the man who had driven past this building every morning for years without knowing her, and who had, on a Thursday at 9 in the morning in the middle of a route, parked his truck and walked into the lobby and asked for a visitor's badge and gone up 32 floors to say the true thing in a room full of people who had been working very hard to establish a false one. She reached out and put her hand on his forearm, his actual forearm through the uniform fabric, and held it there for a moment. He looked down at her hand, then at her. Something in his face went very still in the way it went still when he was deciding not to look away. "Thank you," she said. "You did the actual work," he said. "In there. Whatever happened in that room, that was you." "I know," she said. "I'm still thanking you." He looked at her for a moment longer, and then he said, "Are you hungry? Because I skipped breakfast." She laughed. The laugh came out genuine and slightly wrecked, and she didn't try to fix either quality. "Yes," she said, "I am extremely hungry. Nora's kitchen is 12 minutes from here. It's 11 in the morning. They do a breakfast menu until 1. She looked at him. He looked back at her, and she thought, this is what it looks like when someone stays. Not the grand gesture, though the grand gesture had been genuinely something, but the return to ordinary, the offer of breakfast, the 12-minute drive, the table in a corner somewhere that didn't require a reservation or an advance notice or a best dress. "Let's go," she said. In the weeks that followed, the investigation moved the way regulatory investigations moved. Slowly, in public, and with the particular grinding quality of institutional machinery that was too large to be hurried and too deliberate to be stopped. Martin Greaves resigned before he was asked to. He submitted the letter on a Tuesday morning, and by Tuesday afternoon the financial press had it, and by Tuesday evening there were 6 separate analyses of what it meant for Vantage's leadership structure. 2 of them mentioned Madeline by name in the first paragraph, not as a liability, as the architect of what one piece called one of the more remarkable institutional self-defenses in recent memory. She read that phrase twice. She thought about the regulatory filing, about Ellison's team working in the gap between Priya's interruption and the end of the budget review. She thought about remarkable and what it actually meant and whether the word covered the sleepless nights and the elevator where she'd finally let herself breathe. It didn't, really. But she'd take it. Howard Cheng, one of the 2 undecided board members who had voted in her favor, requested a one-on-one meeting the week after the shareholder meeting. He was 71, silver-haired, with the compressed manner of someone who communicated efficiently because he'd been in enough rooms to know the value of not wasting time. "I want to be honest with you," he said at the start of the meeting, which she appreciated because it meant the rest of it would probably also be honest. "Please," she said. "When I came into that meeting, I was leaning toward the removal, not because of the appearance issue. I want to be clear that I consider that a red herring, and I told Greaves as much privately 3 weeks before. But the manipulated metrics had me concerned about internal control environments." He paused. "Your presentation changed my mind. The evidence was thorough, but that wasn't all of it." She waited. "The man from the lobby," Howard said. "The delivery driver." She kept her face even. "Wyatt Turner." "He wasn't prepared. He didn't have notes. He wasn't coached. He was wearing a work uniform. That's not something you manufacture." He leaned back slightly in his chair. "I've been in governance for 40 years. I know what staged support looks like. That wasn't staged." He paused. "Whatever you've built outside this building, whatever life you're actually living, it puts someone in that room who had no strategic reason to be there. That tells you something real about a person." She sat with that for a moment. "It does," she said quietly. Anyway, he was already moving back to business, the brief human moment filed and closed. "I want to talk about the Pacific Division restructure." She spent the next 45 minutes talking about the Pacific Division restructure, and it was fine, more than fine. It was the work she was good at, moving through it with the fluency of someone who knew the material in her bones. She walked out of the meeting thinking about what Howard had said. "Whatever you've built outside this building." As if what happened outside the work was a separate thing, a contained thing, when she was starting to understand that it wasn't separate at all. It was the whole structure that held everything else up. 3 of the 4 conspiring board members were formally removed by February. The 4th, a man named Selby, whom she had never personally trusted and had never said so, resigned with a statement that used the word reflection 4 times in 11 sentences, which was the corporate language for "I've been advised to exit quietly." The regulatory findings, when they came, were thorough and unambiguous. The data manipulation had been running for 8 months. The people who'd set it in motion had believed they were building an airtight case. What they had actually built was an audit trail that an investigator described in the formal report as unusually well documented, which was the polite way of saying they'd been careless in their confidence that they would succeed. Vantage's stock moved through a predictable cycle. Dip on the news of the investigation. Recovery as the scope became clear, stabilization, and then, by Q2, something that looked a lot like the company coming back to itself. The Pacific Division quarter came in strong. The international partnership that Madeline had been cultivating for 2 years, the one that had been cited by the opposition as a risk area, closed in March and generated a coverage piece in a serious business publication with a photograph that was not the bad-angled conference shot. In this one, she was sitting at a table looking at someone across from her, head slightly tilted, mid-thought. She looked like someone doing her job. She looked like a person. She kept the article. She didn't tell anyone she kept it. She put it in the drawer of her desk at home, not the work desk at Vantage, but the one in her penthouse where she did the other thinking. She wasn't sure why she kept it. Maybe because it was the first piece of press coverage in 4 years that she'd read. start to finish without bracing. Ava's spring recital was in March, as promised, and Madeline had saved the date in October as promised. And she was in the third row of the school's small auditorium on a Thursday evening, with Wyatt beside her, watching 22 children attempt a choreographed number that their teacher had clearly designed with extreme optimism about the coordination of 8-year-olds. Ava was in the second row of children. She had been practicing for 6 weeks. She had practiced at home in the living room while Wyatt watched from the couch, with the expression of a parent absorbing something deeply important about their child's relationship to rhythm. Ava danced with the focused commitment of someone who had made a decision and was executing it. Not gracefully exactly, but with a conviction that somehow made graceful beside the point. When the number ended, Ava found them in the audience with her eyes before she'd even stopped clapping for herself. That look, the quick scan and then the landing, the face that changed when it found the people, hit Madeline somewhere central, somewhere she'd stopped expecting to be hit. "She saw you," Wyatt said quietly. "I saw her see me." She practiced that section 17 times last week. He was looking at the stage, at his daughter in her recital dress, at the absolute lack of embarrassment in her face about the fact that she'd looked for them. She said she wanted to make sure she didn't mess up the part you'd see. Madeline looked at the side of his face. He was smiling, the private kind, the one that wasn't for an audience. She had cataloged this expression over months of evenings without letting herself name why she cataloged it. "Wyatt," she said. I need to tell you something." He turned to look at her. The auditorium was filling with post-recital noise, parents standing, children running, the organized chaos of a school event reaching its end. "Not here," she said, "but tonight." Something in his expression went carefully still, not alarmed, just attending. "Okay," he said. They put Ava to bed at 9:15, which took 40 minutes because Ava had the post-performance energy of someone whose nervous system had been informed that the stakes were high and was now working through the surplus. She needed water and a conversation about whether she'd done the third section correctly, and Wyatt's assessment of the performance rendered honestly and not just kindly, which he gave in the patient-specific way he had for the things that mattered to her. By the time her light was off, they were both slightly wrung out in the good way of an evening that had been full. They ended up on the balcony. November had been coats necessary. March was almost not. The city was doing its late evening sound. He'd brought coffee she hadn't asked for because he'd learned she'd want it, the same way he'd learned she ran cold in the car and turned the heat up without being asked. She held the mug and looked at the city. "I've been thinking about moving," she said. He didn't say anything immediately. "Not far. I looked at a building on Carmichael Street. 12-minute walk from here." She paused. "It's still bigger than this apartment. I'm not suggesting anything about the arrangement of anyone's life. I just want to be closer, to the park, to Nora's, to—" She stopped, looked at her coffee. "To you, both of you. I want to be close." The city noise filled the silence for a moment. "Carmichael Street," he said, "the building with the dark green awning, 7 stories. I know the one." A pause. "They have good light on the west side in the evenings." She looked at him. "You know the building. I drive that block 3 times a week." He looked at his own coffee. Something in his face had moved, not dramatically, just the subtle reconfiguration of a person absorbing something that mattered. 12-minute walk. "Yes." "Madeline." He looked at her. Just looked at her, the same way he'd looked in the lobby of Meridian Tower, and in the kitchen after dinner, and in the parking garage of her building on an ordinary Tuesday. The plain, unhurried attention that saw what was there. "I've been in love with you since approximately the science fair." She blinked. "I didn't say anything because I didn't know how to say it in a way that wasn't—" He shook his head slightly. "I drive a truck. You run a company. I wasn't sure what you needed me to be, and I didn't want to complicate the thing by making it about what I wanted it to be." She looked at him. "Wyatt, you walked into a closed shareholder meeting. That was different." "How was that different?" "Because that was for you. This is—" He stopped. "This is me telling you something that changes things. And I wasn't sure you wanted things to change. She put her coffee down on the balcony railing. She turned to face him properly, not the profile view of two people looking at the same city, but actually face to face in the small space of the balcony with the evening behind them both. I moved my entire life by 12 minutes, she said. I've been eating dinner at this table 3 times a week for 5 months. I came here the night before the biggest professional fight of my life because it was the only place that felt... She stopped, started again. I have a rooftop terrace I've used twice. I have a chef's kitchen I heat things up in. I have walls a professional chose for me. And the place that feels like mine is here. This apartment, this table. She paused. You? He looked at her with that stillness that wasn't passivity. It was the stillness of someone who was fully in the moment and had decided to stay there. The science fair? She said. Really? The water filtration thing. He said it simply. The outliers. You looked at her like she'd said something important, which she had, but most adults don't. He stopped. Yeah, the science fair. She laughed. He laughed. It wasn't a romantic movie laugh. It was the kind that happened between people who knew each other well enough for the thing to be genuinely funny. I'm not easy, she said. I want to say that clearly. I work too much and I have a complicated relationship with most of my own feelings, and I spent the first 30 years of my life believing that the way I look was the most important fact about me. I know, he said. I'm working on the last one. The other 2 are probably structural. I drive a truck and I have an 8-year-old who will absolutely have opinions about your moving 12 minutes away. He said this seriously. Strong opinions, probably in writing. I'm counting on it. He reached over and took her hand, not dramatically, just took it, the same way he'd turned up the heat in the car without asking. Simple, certain. The gesture of someone who had decided and was no longer waiting. She held his hand on the balcony railing with the city spread out below them and thought, this is not a perfect story. This is 2 people who are tired in different ways, who have made different kinds of losses and carried them differently, who found each other by accident in a corner booth and built something out of Saturday parks and farmers markets and bowls of soup on bad days. This is not the story she would have written for herself at 25, back when she still thought the story was about proving something. It was better than that story, in the way that real things were better than planned things, messier, less photogenic, but solid in a way that held your weight. Her 31st birthday was in October. She had told Wyatt in September that she didn't want anything. He had received this information with the expression of a man who understood that I don't want anything and I want something I'm not used to having were often the same statement. She had moved to Carmichael Street in June. The building with the dark green awning, the good light on the west side. The apartment was smaller than the penthouse by half, which she had expected to bother her and didn't. She had put her own things on the walls. Not hired, not curated, just things she'd accumulated that meant something. Ava's finished drawing of her, the posture right, the face finally completed and recognizably hers. A photograph from the farmer's market, one that Wyatt had taken without her knowing on a morning in early spring when she'd been looking at something else. Her face in partial profile, entirely unguarded, entirely herself. The article, the one from the Serious Business publication, where she was mid-thought at a table and looked like a person doing her job. She still worked too much. She'd gotten marginally better at eating lunch with people rather than alone at her desk. She had a standing Tuesday dinner at Wyatt's apartment and a standing Saturday morning at the park that was now more or less a formal institution. She had started going to Ava's school events with the regularity of someone who had been added to the contact list, which she had been, quietly and without ceremony, sometime in the spring. She was not, it should be said, a different person. The mirror was still sometimes a difficult place to stand. There were board meetings where she felt the old contraction in her chest, the involuntary auditing of how she was perceived. There were still mornings when the weight of what she'd carried for 30 years felt less historical and more present than she wanted it to. The work of that, the actual work, the slow and non-linear and unglamorous work of unlearning a decade's worth of other people's voices, was ongoing and would probably always be ongoing. And she'd made her peace with that. What had changed was less dramatic than a transformation and more honest than one. She'd stopped waiting for permission. for the permission to take up the room she was in, to eat the food in front of her without calculating the cost, to walk into a board meeting and take her seat like she'd paid for it, because she had, to receive an 8-year-old's hug in a doorway and let it mean what it meant. The birthday happened in Wyatt's backyard. The building had a small outdoor space that no one else used, which Ava had declared a backyard by fiat 2 years ago, and had proceeded to treat as one. There were string lights that Wyatt had put up in the summer and not taken down. There were mismatched chairs from inside, dragged out. Marcus came with his wife and their 2 kids. Priya came, which surprised Madeline enough that she stood in the door for a second when she arrived. A few of the neighbors had been invited in the easy way of a community that had developed around a shared outdoor space over time. Ava had been in charge of something, the exact scope of which had been negotiated with Wyatt over several days and revealed gradually throughout the evening. She had made a playlist. She had organized the food into a layout that she described as intentional. She had at some point in the past week made a card. She presented it after the cake, which was from the grocery store and slightly lopsided and exactly right, with the ceremony of a person delivering something important. The card was hand-drawn on folded construction paper, purple, with careful lettering inside in Ava's hand. She'd written, "You were never too much. You just hadn't found the right people yet." Madeline read it standing in the string lights with the small backyard around her, and the city audible beyond the fence and the people she'd accumulated over a year of Saturdays sitting in mismatched chairs, and she cried. Not the careful bathroom stall crying of a woman managing the optics of emotion. Just openly, in the backyard, with everyone watching, because some things were big enough that containing them was the wrong choice. Ava, who had prepared for a range of responses to the card, looked satisfied. She patted Madeline's arm with the practical comfort of a child who understood that crying wasn't necessarily bad. "It's true," she said. "I know," Madeline managed. "That's why I'm crying." "Okay." Ava accepted this and went to get more cake. Wyatt appeared beside her. He had a gift for this, the appearing at the right moment, or maybe she'd just gotten better at noticing him. He handed her a napkin for her face, which was not romantic but was entirely correct. She took it. She pressed it to her eyes. He stood beside her without saying anything because he knew when to say nothing, and it was one of the things about him she was never going to be done appreciating. The string lights swayed slightly in the October wind. Marcus's kids were chasing something that had escaped into the corner of the yard. Priya was talking to one of the neighbors with the slightly surprised expression of someone who had stepped outside the professional relationship and found it interesting. Ava was back at the cake table, performing some kind of quality assessment. "Okay," Madeline said, when her face was functional again. "Okay," he said. "She's going to make me cry every birthday." "She absolutely is." He sounded entirely at peace with this. She looked around the backyard, not at it the way she'd looked at rooms her whole professional life, assessing, reading, cataloging, but just looked at it. The mismatched chairs, the lopsided cake, the string lights that had been up since June. The people who were here because they wanted to be here, not because they'd been organized here, not because an event planner had ensured their attendance. She thought about the Hartwell Grand, 1 year ago, the engineered elegance, the jazz quartet, the 4 courses she'd barely touched, the voices in the alcove saying liability, like it was a verdict and not an opinion. She thought about walking out of that ballroom and walking 4 blocks in $700 shoes and pushing open the door of a small restaurant because the light inside was warm. There was a version of that story where she'd called the car service right away and gone back to the hotel and ordered room service alone and gotten up the next morning and done the inventory in the mirror and kept moving in the life she'd built around the perimeter of the thing she actually needed. That version was easy to imagine because it was the version she'd been living for years. The smallest possible pivot had changed everything. A door pushed open. A corner booth. A child with pink hair ties standing at the edge of the table saying, "We noticed you were sitting alone. My dad and I have extra room." She was not a person who believed in fate. She believed in choices, in the accumulation of small choices that either moved you toward your life or moved you around it. But she also believed in the particular grace of moments that arrived unplanned, that you had to be paying attention to recognize, and that you had to be brave enough to say yes to when they did. She had been paying attention. She had said yes, That was enough. That was, it turned out, almost everything. Wyatt's hand found hers in the October dark. She folded her fingers into his and held on, and didn't say anything because there wasn't anything to say that the holding didn't already cover. There are things you spend years believing about yourself that other people can't argue you out of. Nobody can talk you into worthiness. Nobody can convince you from the outside that you are allowed to be exactly as you are, the size of you, the mess of you, the complicated specific fact of you, and have that mean something good instead of something that needs managing. That's internal work, and it's slow, and it doesn't have a clean finish line, and there's no morning when you wake up and it's simply done. But there are people who make the work possible, people who sit across from you at a table and don't make you feel like you're too much. People who learn how you take your coffee and remember that you run cold in cars and show up to rooms they have no business being in because they know something true about you and they can't let it go unsaid. People who make a card on purple construction paper that reaches past every defense you've built and lands in the place you'd stopped expecting anyone to reach. You don't find your people by being smaller. You don't find them by managing your image until it's palatable. You find them by walking into a warm room on a bad night and being exactly yourself, even when that self is sitting in a party dress in a diner at 10:45, face wet, birthday card propped against a salt shaker. Madeline Cross would run Vantage Global for another 11 years. She would make decisions that didn't all work out. She would have quarters that were hard and years that were harder, and she would sit across tables from people who looked at her and still saw the liability before they saw the leader. She would do the mirror work slowly on the days she had capacity, and she would not do it on the days she didn't. And she would eventually, not all at once, not permanently, but more often than not, reach the end of the inventory and stop before it was finished, because the inventory was not the point. She would watch Ava turn 9 and then 10, and then impossibly 11, watching the person she was becoming with the specific attention she'd learned from Wyatt, the unhurried kind, the kind that didn't project or redirect, just witnessed. Ava finished the neighborhood map and started a new one. The new one covered the whole city. In the center of it, drawn carefully and then outlined twice, was a small green square, the backyard, labeled in Ava's precise hand, Home, all three of us. She put that one above her desk at Carmichael Street, next to the photograph from the farmer's market. On the last day of October, a year after the birthday in the backyard, Wyatt asked her something in the kitchen of his apartment while Ava was at school and the coffee was getting cold on the counter and the city was doing its mid-morning sound outside. He asked it simply, without theater, in the way he said things that were true and important and needed no frame built around them to hold them up. She said yes before he finished the sentence. She said it and then she laughed because she'd interrupted him. And he said that was fine. He'd gotten to the part that mattered, and she said she had too. The coffee was cold. Neither of them touched it. Outside the window, the city moved through its October morning, and in a small apartment on the third floor of a building that had good bones and aging plumbing, two people stood in the kitchen and stayed there, in the ordinary light of an ordinary day, which had always been the whole point. It had always been the whole point,